what else, like where else they want to grow, where are they at in their progression, their pathway.
I'd like to correct, I think I Twitter stalked you.
Shut up in my room like a little publishing gremlin.
Teachers know what they're doing, and they're doing a lot of good stuff, but then it's like, how do we share that if we can't talk about it?
Welcome back to Hello World, a podcast for educators interested in computing and digital making. I'm James Robinson, computing educator and professional development pioneer.
And I'm Gemma Coleman, editor of Hello World magazine and workshop wizard. As ever, we really value your comments and feedback, which you can share at helloworld.cc/podcast feedback.
This week, having returned from the CSDA Teachers Conference in Chicago, we're reflecting on what we think makes an effective professional development experience for computing educators. In particular, I'm interested in the different forms that PD can take and the different things that educators can take away from each. Gemma, hopefully you've had some time to recover from what was a really intense week. Do you have any reflections on the conference itself or on the wider question of what makes effective PD?
I think my biggest reflection is mainly that it was just so amazing being back face to face, as I'm sure you felt as well. I think although this year has definitely felt a lot more normal COVID-wise, this was still, I'm pretty sure, the first time that I was back face to face with educators since about February 2020. So that was really lovely, just having some, just the energy and excitement of that. And I think especially because working on the magazine, I spend an awful lot of my time at my desk, behind my computer, and like shut up in my room like a little publishing gremlin. So it's just really lovely listening to people talking about articles that you've commissioned or created in that, quiet little environment away from people, or, hearing people talking about themes in the magazine that they really enjoyed that, we'd selected at the start of the year. So I think it's really motivating when you actually see the difference that your work's making. And I think something that we heard and saw a lot about in this conference was how Hello World, in particular, the big book of computing pedagogy, was being used for PD. So as you obviously know, James, as part of this exhibition, as part of the conference, we had like an exhibition stand where people could drop by and have little chats with us and grab some free magazines. And something that came up a lot in those conversations was how teachers had used the big book since it had come out, or how they were planning on using it if it was the first time they'd seen it. And some people had made the big book, I guess, a more formal part of their PD, where they were doing sort of like reading, book clubs, where they were reading a different section each week or each month with their groups. But I think even on the less sort of formal end of the spectrum like that, I think you've got to remember that even just the act of picking up that magazine, having a skim through, adding some post-it notes, and getting a really great idea for your next class is PD. And an extension of that, sharing your reflections and findings with each other. So, something that I think we've said a few times is, at the conference itself, was that PD isn't just about attending a course. And you obviously know, James, that we ran a super lively writing workshop where you could learn to write for Hello World and get some tips and techniques for the best way to share your ideas with readers. And writing for the magazine is a really great way to reflect on your own practice. And I think that's what a lot of the workshop attendees took away with them, that even if they don't end up submitting an article idea to us, they've had that reflection, that chance to reflect on their own practice, and that PD can be, so much more than just attending a course. That's a lot that I've just said, and you have got so much more experience in this area, James, with delivering PD. So I think people would probably be very interested in hearing your kind of sum up your thoughts.
I mean, I was slightly distracted by your self-appropriated job description of a publishing gremlin, and I might use that going forward whenever I introduce you. So no, and I think you're right. A lot of those reflections that you've had about like conversations with educators, I think going back to one of the very first things you said about being face to face and connecting with educators, I think for me that underscores something that's really important within a PD kind of session, is that it's about connecting with other educators, and that being really, really important. And some of the nicest moments were sort of, running sessions and just letting teachers and educators just talk to each other and share their ideas. And subsequently, the worst moments were having to ask them to stop so that you could interject and share something else.
Getting your teacher hat on, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, I think that in-person nature, that communication, that sharing is really, really important. And then something else that you kind of touched on is this sort of multiple means of engagement kind of thing, is that, some things you might learn best by going on a course, being told a bunch of information, assimilating that information, and going away and delivering it in your practice. Other things are things that you're going to talk about. Other things are, even just delivering a lesson in your classroom is almost its own form of PD. It's you trying a new idea and self-reflecting on that. Reading a magazine article, writing a magazine article, listening to a podcast, all of these are forms of PD in their own right, and they're opportunities to further our learning if we grab them. And so I think that reflection is really important, and I think it also helps us deliver flexible PD for a whole range of audiences, right?
Yeah, it's much more accessible, isn't it? If PD is just seen as, I'm going to go along on this, massive course that I have to get a budget signed off for and all the rest of it, it doesn't seem that attainable. But listening to a podcast on your way to work seems a lot more achievable, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's part of, I think, something that Sue spoke about in her talk at the conference was about kind of recognizing teachers as professional individuals with knowledge of their context, their learners, and giving them agency over kind of, how they teach and how they learn. And that's really important. And I think so as a PD provider or someone that's sort of run a lot of PD, I think one of the kind of the key words for me, whenever I'm delivering some PD, I think it's not about me instructing, it's about me facilitating and sort of making space for those conversations, providing a little bit of input, and then letting those conversations run away and see where they get to, and then kind of drawing people together. We met so many amazing educators while we were at CSDA that we had to interview at least a couple to share with you their perspective on this question of effective PD. First, I spoke to Brian Turek, a K-12 computer science education leader and now Director of Education for CSDA.
So I sat down at the conference with Brian, or BT, to find out a bit more about the sort of rationale behind the conference and their approach to providing PD for the wonderful teachers here at CSDA. So welcome, Brian. Do you want to introduce yourself to our audience briefly?
Sure, I'd be delighted. I am currently Director of Education for the Computer Science Teachers Association, and I'm a previous middle school teacher and administrator for the K-12 public school system in San Francisco.
Great. And we're now we're chilling out at the end of the conference. It's been such a great conference. It's my first time attending in person. What's the kind of the purpose of the conference, and what do you hope teachers that are attending are getting out of such a session?
I think something that sets it apart is the desire for community building in the United States, and I think also more broadly, most computer science teachers have a department of one, so they don't have a colleague to collaborate with like most other subject area teachers. And so they lack that both connection and community. And so we really hope to build that here so that when teachers go home to their schools, they have someone to ask for help, exchange ideas, share resources. So we both hope to do that there, as well as bolster those regional networks.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to build some pedagogical knowledge, content knowledge, share resources, like translate research to practice, like those things. But I would say that like what sets us apart is the community building.
Yeah, and I think that reflects a little bit our situation in the UK, where teachers are often, or have in the past, been often very isolated. And I think it's really important to bring them together and help them connect and share good practice. And I think being here, I think that's certainly something that's come across, is people have felt very relieved to be back in person.
Absolutely.
And to be able to spend time together and make those connections. That's been really important. But there's been so much professional development that's going on at the conference, through workshops and conversations. To you, what does effective PD for teachers look like, and what forms can it take?
Effective PD involves some community building, chances for teachers to make connections to people and for not to be only about the content they're learning. Mm-hmm. I think it should have an element that is relevant for their practice next week or this week or tomorrow, something in the immediate future they can take back. And I think it should be grounded to a bigger picture, so aligned to a framework or positioning it so that teachers over time kind of understand the bigger picture and are able to reflect on what else, like where else they want to grow, where are they at in their progression, their pathway. And then I think it is also helpful for teachers to leave feeling appreciated. And so when leading PD personally, I always like to make sure like that there's something teachers are taking away, and they're feeling that they're feeling like the all-stars they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's been nice here as well is that I think teachers are given that sense of agency, in that there's lots of, it's not, a day of PD where it's all very prescribed. They can go and choose their sessions, they can pick what is sort of going to resonate with them, and that's been really apparent here as well. And they're learning from their peers. It's not a top-down, this is how you will do things. I think one of the things that's been really exciting about being here at the conference, and this is largely in thanks to you and the organisational work that's been put in by CSCA, is that we've been able to bring our 12 pedagogy principles here, and I think part of that was trying to help give teachers a shared language. Absolutely. And I guess that must be really challenging here in the States, right? Because as well, not only have we got, it's very geographically big, but every state has a different set of standards and principles and approaches. So do you have any kind of reflections on the value of that kind of shared language piece?
Oh, I think it's vitally important, and I think there's a lot more shared language around the computer science content objectives, outcomes, because while each state adopts its own set of instructional standards, the vast majority are built on or are the CSTA standards, and so there's not that much variance. However, there's a wider variety of like what are the requirements for certification of teachers, and there's very little commonality around what effective pedagogy looks like. And so we need common language and a common framework for that, and it really hasn't existed. There's very few methods courses because there's very few CS teacher preparation programs. So most of our PD is in service, meaning existing teachers take some sort of training to begin teaching computer science and often get certification alongside that or afterwards. And it's tricky. So there's a real need around this. And so we feel incredibly grateful for this.
Well, no, we feel very incredibly grateful to be able to come and share this with your teachers. And I think the other thing you mentioned about sort of in-service teachers maybe transitioning into computer science is often what that means is that the biggest and the most pressing demand often is the content knowledge, is understanding the concepts that they're trying to teach. But sometimes that maybe means that the pedagogy gets left behind or becomes
Absolutely.
Secondary.
Something I witnessed from my time in San Francisco Public Schools is that teachers often teach multiple subjects, and I would observe them teaching aspects they're more familiar with, like mathematics, and also computer science. And I might see brilliant collaborative group work where teachers are working to mitigate status and have these collaborative activities where students, it's inquiry-based, that sort of thing, and then go into their computer science environment where students are working independently or, maybe asking partners for help, but what I see is an over-reliance, I think a lack of confidence leads to an over-reliance on the prescribed curriculum or what's dictated for them in a lesson, as opposed to relying on their teaching craft.
Yes.
And so I think having something that says this is what effective pedagogy is in computing can help, and time for reflection can help with that transfer of things that teachers might already be skilled in, but feel less comfortable bringing into their computing class.
And I think sometimes this transition into computing can be a little bit not demotivating, but it can leave teachers feeling having less agency and having less sort of ownership of what's going on. And I think it's maybe trying to kind of move the dial back to recognising that teachers are trained professionals with expertise and experience, and they know their students, and that's their job, right? And empowering them to take those decisions to use what's right for their learners.
Absolutely.
And my final question is, so we've had, 1,600, something like that, people attend the conference, which has been absolutely fantastic. It's been buzzing. How do we then take PD out to the masses, to the people that couldn't attend in person, the people that don't have the time to get out here? How do we move the dial on that?
I think there always has to be a menu of options because there's a number of constraints and teachers are busy and also deserve a vacation.
Yeah.
I think a number of online options are important. So in late October, we'll be collaborating with the Raspberry Pi Foundation on an online summit focused around the Big Book of Computing Pedagogy. And another thing that we focus on is our regional CSTA chapters. Mm-hmm. And so a goal is for chapter leaders to select what's most relevant to teachers in their area and find teachers and facilitators to lead PD locally. Mm-hmm. So we rely heavily on that. So I think a combination of local networks, centrally provided things, online and in-person options.
I think that choice and flexibility piece that you mentioned there is really, really important. Super. Well, thank you, BT. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of the conference.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
It was great there to just hear Brian's reflections on PD and the CSTA conference. And we're super, super grateful to Brian and the rest of the CSTA team for inviting us and supporting us at the conference. James, towards the end of the conference, I saw you sneak off on what I thought was a quest for yet more free swag. But I believe you're actually speaking to our second guest.
Yes. Yes, I was working. I was doing some interviewing and not just leaving you all to do the pat down, which I think you did. So I had a really great conversation with another conference attendee, Elizabeth Bacon, who's an educator and curriculum developer who's worked with organisations such as Code.org and Coda-Z. And so, we had a little bit of a chat about her experience of PD.
So I sat down with Elizabeth Bacon, who I bumped into a number of times at the conference, and just had a little bit of a chat with her about what she's taken away from CSTA 22.
I'd like to correct, I think I Twitter stalked you, is actually what happened.
No, that's fine. We started off our conversation on Twitter, but then we met up in person, and we've had some really great conversations. So we're at the end of the conference now, Elizabeth. If you reflect back on the last 3-4 days, a week, whatever it's been, what has been your kind of biggest takeaway? What are you taking away from the conference? What have you learned? What have you enjoyed? What are your reflections?
Well, I would say it's a bit of a blur right now.
Yeah.
Because we're just on the last day, so technically it's still going on. But I think that there's been this conference compared to previous conferences, it just feels like a lot more polished, a lot more sort of like we're getting systems in place compared to a few years ago when CSTA felt like sort of this ragtag group of educators that were coming together and, just trying to make sure that computer science is going to be in the schools. And now I feel like we've gotten to a point where we realize, okay, we're here, we're going to stay, but how do we make this sustainable? How do we make it equitable? What are the things we do to make sure that we're doing it well and that students are having a cohesive experience, that we've been talking a lot about localization at scale. How do we meet the diverse needs of our students? So I think seeing that, moving from kind of what felt like 7 years ago as just survival mode in a lot of ways, to seeing, we're at McCormick, it's huge, it feels very slick.
Yeah.
It feels kind of all grown up,
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. There's definitely that sort of that end point of that journey, and it's been really great. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to go to many sessions during the conference, but I think I've seen you popping in and out of a few sessions.
Yes.
So, what would you kind of say has been made a really good session while you've been here? What have you enjoyed about the sessions, or what does good PD look like while you're at a conference like this?
Well, I think one of the things that I really like about PD is the opportunity for educators to talk to each other and reflect on their practice with other professionals. So, if you're at a PD, you've got a giant group of experts that often don't have a chance to share their expertise with one another. So I think for me, good PD leaves a lot of space for reflection on what we're doing, but also that peer-to-peer communication. And I think we think about the PD facilitator rather than the trainer to say, here's this idea that we're going to explore together jointly as professionals. Obviously, I went to your workshop, which was fantastic. And, you were definitely bringing in a lot of content expertise for this new, the semantic waves that is, something a lot of us haven't encountered before. So I think you did have to say this is what it is.
Yeah.
But what I really appreciated was the opportunity for us to think about our own lessons and to conference with each other about, how would this work for you? How do you do it in your classroom? Because even when you facilitate a PD, you get so many ideas from the other teachers. So I think respecting the expertise of the professionals in the room is probably the number one thing. And for it to be more communicative and collaborative than performative. You know?
Yeah, that's really important. And I think whenever we've delivered PD, we try to kind of, you've got to sort of situate it as close to the participants in the room, as close to their practice and their experience and their expertise, because they know their students, they know their contacts, they know the challenges that they face, and they are bringing a wealth of expertise with them. I think something else that's been really interesting, and it kind of, the session we did on Thursday on semantic waves, but also I think one of the other things we've been talking about at the conference is sometimes to be able to have that dialogue with other teachers, we need to have that shared language.
Right.
And that's a real challenge. Is that something a challenge that you've experienced, and do you think it's something that we're starting to overcome as a teaching profession community kind of internationally?
Well, I think one of the things that, when we talk about the shared language or the language that we're using around our pedagogical approaches is that we're getting a lot of people in CS who come from a lot of different disciplines. So it's very rare, at least over here, for a teacher to have graduated from teacher college saying, I'm gonna teach CS.
Yeah.
It's just, we're not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So a lot of the kind of, when we talk about our instructional strategies, we're getting them from literacy, we're getting them from maths, we're getting them from science. And what's happened, and then we're also getting a lot of people from tech who didn't go to teacher school and maybe have their own experiences in education, but being a passenger on that ship is not the same as, trying to navigate that ship. So it's a very, there are a lot of people coming in with a diverse set of experiences, which can make what we're doing really robust, and we can meet the needs of a lot of students. But it can also be hard, when we talk about, for instance, inquiry-based learning, or some other strategies that we use, that can mean something really specific to some people, and then it means something different to somebody else. And I think that's been sort of a challenge when I've been talking to other people who are in the curriculum development space or in the PL space, is what exactly do you mean by that? Not because I'm trying to challenge you, but let's make sure we're on the same page. So I think the work, and I know you said this is not an ad for your stuff, but the work that you've been doing with the Big Book of Pedagogy has been so helpful that, when somebody says, for example, prim, it's people know what that means. And that's something that was specifically created for this space. And it's not necessarily a surprise. It's one of those things that when teachers look at it, they're like, well, of course, or I'm already doing it.
Yeah.
But now we have a name for it, and now that we've kind of operationalized it, we're able to go out and sort of take it to the next level and share resources in a way that wasn't really possible before. Because there's the underlying sort of learning sciences theory, and then there are these strategies that we use, and then there's this concrete, how are those strategies implemented in the classroom? And sometimes I think that middle layer of just what are the systems and strategies that we can talk about for the specific, this discipline specific pedagogy is kind of missing. So we're sort of, teachers know what they're doing, and they're doing a lot of good stuff, but then it's how do we share that if we can't talk about it?
Yeah, and that's really important. And I think just going back to what you were saying about the whole, computing kind of being a broad church, we've got sort of discipline as a discipline. It is such a broad discipline that touches upon so many other subjects and disciplines that it makes sense that we have people that are coming from tech and from science and maths and English and all of those other subjects, and that though they're bringing their own subject-specific pedagogy and ideas and expertise, and that does mean that we're in this really exciting space where we are, we've got some really great pedagogy already, but we're also developing new pedagogy all the time. And so this, the book that we've produced and the principles, it's a snapshot in time, and we will build and grow that. But I think that double-edged sword of having people that are coming in without that experience of computing, they're bringing a lot into the discipline, but they're also having to learn a lot and take. We might often have the same words for very different things in different disciplines that we're having to kind of navigate that challenge. And then I guess my last question to you, because we talked about this a little bit in a conversation the other day, was around the different forms that PD can take.
Right.
So we're here at a conference, we've got physical presence, we've got people talking to each other in person, and I think sometimes PD is almost like a capital letter kind of PD, which is like an inner space with other people, being facilitated by somebody. But for me, PD, it can take a whole range of other forms.
Right.
And I think you kind of echoed that in a conversation we had the other day. So how else can teachers engage in effective PD that doesn't involve them travelling or talking to other people maybe?
Right. I think there are kind of two dimensions to that, which is like what are the resources available and what's the what's the process through which you're engaging in it, and also sort of like what sort of PD are teachers looking for at a point in time? Because, we have teachers who really are kind of thrown into this, and they are, they're teachers, but they haven't done computing before.
Right.
And then their needs for PD, they kind of need that boot camp of like, I just want to get into the classroom, tell me what to do, tell me what to say. Yeah. And then maybe after a while, they're going to be able to do more of the sort of PD that we're seeing here with people who have already gone through that process. And they're like, okay, I'm going to expand my practice. I'm going to reflect. So I think that's one dimension. But then I think the other dimension that you were talking about is, yes, you can go to the week-long summer workshop and be in person with everybody, and it's going to be an amazing transformative experience. But then there are also, we do have opportunities like within our local communities of building that community of practice of just communicating with our peers. So I think that sort of informal space of, oh, you had that problem. Yeah. Oh, here's how I did. I think there's that too. Sorry, I'm thinking while I'm talking, so it's just like a little bit hard. But there's, those sorts of informal conversations, or those hallway conversations, or those teachers' lounge conversations. I have to say, I worked at a K-12, and I was always kind of like looking at I worked in the high school. I was always looking at what the elementary teachers were doing, because I was like, you guys are, you're into the manipulatives, you're into, all of these things that we know could be good for everybody, but they're just so necessary for, those younger kids. But my kids loved it too. Yeah. When we were doing paper craft stuff, they loved it. So getting those conversations, but also just giving yourself that space to sit down and reflect. And that's something I'm not good at. It's like, we get so kind of like bogged down with the prepping and the doing and the marking and the assessing and everything, and it's like, do I have time to just sit down and read something? Yeah. And generally it's on the plane. Like that's when I can read, is when I'm on the plane. So I think there are a lot of forms that PD can take, but I would kind of have a caveat there that's work time. That's time that teachers need. We need to recognize that if a teacher's sitting down and reading the big book of pedagogy, like, they're working. Yeah. Are we giving them space in their workday to do that? Because if we're not, then, they're not only will they not have the time to do it, but we're not going to have the cognitive energy to actually process all of that. Yeah. And that's kind of a danger there. Well, and again, this is a bit of an issue in the, sort of PD events. They often, certainly in the UK, if I say I'm going to go to this course, it's like, well, okay, you're going to need time to go to that course, and we're going to pay to get a supply teacher in. But for you to say, I need some time to go and listen to a podcast, have a conversation with another teacher, visit another school, read this book, because you don't have to go anywhere. Right. That's what Sunday night's for. Yeah. We just do that in your evening, right? Or even, can I get a supply teacher so that I can go observe my peer, and see what they're doing in the classroom? Yeah. Because I think in some ways, actually, being in the classroom, delivering lessons in itself is a really great form of PD. Mm-hmm. And so you were saying the idea of kind of like bootable, bootstrapping, kind of giving people some content to just say, just go and teach this. Be reassured that this is effective, this will work. Here's what you might want to think about, but just making sure that they have that their focus can be not on the
the concepts and the content and having to plan the lesson, but just thinking about, I am going to focus in this lesson on my pupil relationships and getting them to talk to each other or
Right.
use language. I think giving them the space to do that is really important, and I think that's where, you know, organisations like Code.org and Raspberry Pi and other organisations that are providing content can provide people with resources that just mean they can focus on the teaching and learning.
Right. But I do think it is important with that you know, we have these resources that are really rich with you know, with a lot of research-based strategies, that let's at least give teachers the heads up.
Yes.
This is what's going on, because otherwise you're kind of thrown in, and these are smart, you know, educated professionals with a lot of expertise. Let's tell them, you know, this is why we're doing it this way.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to make you figure out the learning objective. This is what it is. You don't need to reverse engineer my lesson. You know, let me tell you what's going on here.
But also, if this doesn't work for you, change it.
Absolutely.
Super. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you throughout the whole conference.
Yeah, I'm
Elizabeth.
so glad I got to meet you in person,
Thank
and
you
that
so
you
much.
did answer my Twitter.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, that was a great conversation. And I think, you know, to try and get some wider perspectives, we asked our wider audience, what do you think makes a great computing PD experience? And former guest on the podcast, Kat Lamin, sort of shared her reflections, which she's been very fortunate to experience some excellent PD over the years. And one of the key things is having facilitators who are passionate and enthusiastic, and that they give you lots of opportunities to talk and work creatively with new, interesting people. And when you leave feeling excited, engaged, and eager.
That's definitely the key. I think if you're not leaving feeling excited, that's a worry. And Andy Colley has also sent us his thoughts. He's given a few kind of clear, you know, key ideas to what he thinks makes a great PD session, and that's training that has a clear purpose, improves your practice of subject knowledge, has time built in to actually apply it, which I definitely agree is really, really important. And that you might even get some follow-up to it, because sometimes I think if you're just, you know, if it's just a one-off kind of thing where you don't ever get a chance to kind of go back to anybody with questions, that can be a bit difficult. So totally agree with you there, Andy. And he's also said, just like us, having that in-person kind of experience is, I don't know, perhaps a lot more valuable, and that you get the chance to get good biscuits, Andy has put. So just agree with absolutely everything he said here.
Yeah, I want to sort of pick on one thing that he did say. Sometimes, as computer scientists, we can be susceptible to I'm going to learn about this new gadget or new toy or new tech. And I think we wouldn't be computer science without that instinct, but that we've also got to kind of resist that sometimes and make sure that we're focusing on how we improve our classroom practice. So if you have a question for us or a comment about our discussion today, then you can email via podcast@helloworld.cc, or you can tweet us at helloworld_edu. My thanks to Brian and Elizabeth for sharing their time, experience and expertise with us today. We're going to be taking a short break now over the summer, but we'll be back in a few weeks' time for another series of the Hello World podcast. So Gemma, what did we learn?
Sensible answer is that we have managed extremely well over the last 2, 3, however many years it is now, in a virtual online world, but nothing quite beats the joy of in-person chats with teachers.
Well, I think having run several sessions, I think great PD is built on really colourful sticky notes.